Hello and many thanks for joining us on the program. I am Imoni Amarere. About 26.5 million people in Nigeria are projected will grapple with high levels of food insecurity between the months of June and August this year. According to the Nigerian federal government and its partners, CADA, Harmonese, and the United Nations agencies such as the Food and Agricultural Organization as well as UNICEF, the figures will rise sharply from the 18.6 million people that were vulnerable to food insecurity in 2023 to 26.5 million people in 2024. Of the 26.5 million people expected to experience food insecurity, 4.4 million of them live in the northeast of Nigeria. The World Bank, in its latest food security report, also says that 7 states across the northwest and the northeast will experience food security crisis because of insecurity and armed conflicts, which will reduce the already falling standards of living. Now, out of this number, 9 million children will be at risk of acute malnutrition across 26 states. Now, worse still, 2.5 million of these children could face severe acute malnutrition, otherwise known as SAM, that would require critical nutrition treatment. Doctors Without Borders recently described the malnutrition level as catastrophic, as over 854 children died in its facilities in Zamfara, Sokoto, and Katsina states alone from malnutrition and limited access to healthcare facilities. Now, with particular reference to the over 9 million children that will be affected, the United Nations calls it child wasting. It says it is the most lethal form of malnutrition. It affects 45 million children under the age of 5 globally. Yet, it is entirely preventable. Child wasting happens when nutrition diets, essential services, and positive nutrition and care practices are unavailable to women and children. According to the UN agencies, the global response to ending child wasting has been inadequate. It requires new and innovative financing mechanisms for a sustainable and more efficient solution to scale up access to prevention and the treatment for women and children, regardless of where they live. Now, to tackle this challenge, the United Nations has set up the Child Nutrition Fund to support government-led reports in a selected number of countries that carry some of the highest number or proportion of children under 5 years of age with wasting. Nigeria, with its 9 million children at risk of acute malnutrition, definitely has a huge problem on its hands. Now, against the backdrop of the current economic and security challenges around the country, nutritionists are warning of imminent kwashiorkor and infections among children, and of course, rise in maternal morbidity and mortality due to poor nutrition. So, what is the way out for Nigeria, especially, and the children in particular? These are the issues we'll be looking at on the program today as we look at food security and the nutrition challenge in Nigeria. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment and we'll get to meet our guest analysts who are joining us here in the studio and are also joining us virtually.
Are critical, germane to Nigeria's democratic process.
Politicians can only be seen maybe on television by judges. They should not intermingle, because once you intermingle, then you destroy the systems.
When the personalities are big, important to national discourse.
When you reach certain stage in power and you demonstrate arrogance to the extreme, there's no other thing that will happen to you other than to fall.
When the developments are seemingly complex, confounding like a 1,000-piece jigsaw, that's when we require bold, sound, and analytical minds to help put the pieces together. Jigsaw with Benga Arileba, now showing Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 p.m. on AIT. Jigsaw, demystifying the issues. The Nigeria of our dream, the Nigeria we need, is the united, indissoluble, and cohesive Nigeria which guarantees equity, fairness, justice, and prosperity for its citizens. That is our focus on people, politics, and power. It is fresh, insightful, impactful. It's a must-watch. People, politics, and power on AIT.
Thank you so much for staying with us. And it's people, politics, and power. And today we are focusing our attention on food insecurity in Nigeria and the challenges of nutrition that comes with it. I'm joined in the studio by two very key persons in this regard. I'm joined by Nemat Hajiboy, who is the Chief of Nutrition at UNICEF in Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining us, Nemat.
Thank you.
We're also joined by Ayodele Gbemileke. He is the Senior Program Officer, Maternal, Newborn, Health and Nutrition. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And joining us via Zoom from Lagos is Henrich Babatunde Shoteye. He is a clinical nutritionist and a dietitian. He's joining us from Lagos, the commercial city of Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining us, Henrich.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much.
Great. Good to have you. Let's begin on an exploratory note. And let me begin with you. What is the nutrition level in Nigeria today? What's the status, nutrition status of Nigeria as of today?
Thank you. It's an honor to be here on the show with you. When we look at the nutrition status of a country, we usually look at the status of nutrition in women and in children because they're the most vulnerable. So I'll speak to the nutrition status of children. Sadly, Nigeria is ranked second in the world and first in Africa in terms of the number of children who are malnourished. So we have an estimated 35 to 40 million children under 5 in Nigeria, and about 12 to 13 million are considered stunted, which is they're short for their age. We have another 3 million children who are wasted or suffer acute malnutrition shocks, and we have about 23, 24 million children who are anemic. So if you add all these numbers up, we're saying out of our 35 million children, about 25 to 27 million suffer some form of malnutrition or the other, which means our children are not growing well. And nutrition in childhood is the foundation for our future and our lives. So I'd say that the situation is not as great as it should be. And we must join all our forces, whether you're with the government, whether a UN agency, whether another organization, to come together to secure the future, secure the nutrition of our children in Nigeria.
So, when people, or when we talk about poor nutrition or, poor nutrition, what exactly do we mean? What is it that makes a good nutrition, and what is it that makes a nutrition not very good?
Okay. In simple languages, so that I don't bring in technical terms. We say when a food on your plate is well colored, as in you can see different colors on your plate, then you can be sure that you are having sufficient amount of nutrients from both the different food groups we have, from the cereals, from the grains, from the proteins, and from the carbohydrates and all of that. You have the vegetables, you have the fruits of different colors. So there's this terminology we just say, color up your plate. So once your plate is colored up with these different, because all the different colors have different nutrients in simple languages, but an adequate diet is one that have all the 6 classes of food groups that we have. And then there's additional one that we also added, that is breastfeeding. Breast milk is also part of the food group. So we start from that early stage. Start giving your baby from birth, first 1 hour of birth, breast milk, early initiation of breast milk, because that is the foundation of good nutrition.
All right. Well, let me bring Henrich into this discussion now. He is a clinical nutritionist. And I'm curious to know whether or not this situation that we're talking about, I mean, Nemat just described a very frightening situation of tens of millions of Nigerian children who are not getting the kind of nutrition that they deserve. But is it limited to children alone, or does it affect adults? I mean, in terms of good nutrition, poor nutrition.
Thank you very much. Actually, it's not limited to children alone. It's affecting adults as well. And that's why we try as much as possible to create all the necessary awareness for people just to know what to eat, what's the right food to eat, what time to eat, how to eat, when to eat, and a whole lot. So just like my colleague over there rightly said, it's all about adequate nutrition. There's what we call the balanced diet. It's good enough to have all the food classes of food in your meal. So, but in most cases, what we have now is that most times people eat more of one class, maybe the carbohydrate class of food, and less of the protein, vitamins, and mineral class of food. So basically, it's not just children, but it's affecting adults as well.
In other words, you are saying that for us, for even the adults, to have a balanced diet, there must be carbohydrates, vitamins, and protein. All of it must be present. Is that what Ayodele means when she talks about the colors of a meal?
Oh, exactly. Everything has to be brightly colored, put together.
Okay. So how do people go about getting these different colors in one meal, for instance? If I were to take lunch now, what must I do to ensure that I have a balanced diet with all the nutrients in it?
So there's what we call my food plate. And we always advise that when you are eating, when you are having a meal, be it breakfast, lunch, or dinner, let about half of your plate be more of vegetables. But what we have in the general situation is more than half of their plate is more of carbohydrates. Take, for instance, a lunch of, let me say, gari or eba or semo or pounded yam, for example, you will see a very huge portion of that carbohydrate and possibly a very little soup. That if there is even vegetable, sometimes it's even plain soup, and very little protein. And almost after finishing that meal,
We lost your voice there.
almost after
Yes.
finishing that,
Go ahead.
yeah, can you hear me? Yes. Almost after finishing that meal, they are hardly having fruits or vegetables. Most times when you ask people, how often do you have fruits in a week? They tell you they probably don't even eat fruits at all. They don't take oranges, they don't take watermelon, they don't take pawpaw because they don't see it as part of a meal or part of their food. The idea is just for them to eat that lunch full of gari and soup and they are done. So when we are talking about having your plate colored, like she rightly said, have about half of your plate vegetables, about a quarter of your plate should be the carbohydrates, and the other portion should be your protein, while the remaining quarter should be the fruits that you can have alongside. So you have an adequate balanced meal in one plate.
Okay, Nema, let me come back to you here. Now, since 2020, there is a report that I read that says that 78% of Africans have been unable to afford nutritious diets. This is as far back as 2020, 4 years or more running, as it were. And then now we have, as it were, more of economic challenges, security challenges that we're not there or not as much as it is today in 2020. What picture does that paint of the situation today?
So I'd start by saying, 2020, of course, was a difficult year for the world as the COVID pandemic hit. When we look at the trends coming out of it, in 2021, we started doing a bit better, just generally coming out of COVID, but the effects of COVID were still there. Then 2022, we did a bit better. 2023, I think there was chaos in the world, generally speaking, with many, many issues happening all over. And I would say for Nigeria in particular, as we transitioned to 2024, we have been hit with 2 or 3 different things that unfortunately analysis done last week called the Cadre Harmonisé, which covers the West Africa region, is showing us a very, I would say, an early warning of what things may look like if we don't act quickly. And that is, it's saying that about 32 million Nigerians will not know where their next meal will come from as we enter this lean season, and especially the peak of the lean season, July, August, September. So we have a little bit of time as we enter the lean season, but we must act now. All of us join our forces, all government agencies, all UN agencies, all partners, to make sure that we mitigate against what could happen, in which case we'd have more children facing malnutrition, more women getting malnourished, including adults. And then the health system would have to deal with that burden, the consequence of not getting enough food. So everyone would feel the pressure. So I think we have the data that's telling us start to take action and be prepared. I think we can take action and mitigate the situation, but we need to act urgently. And that is our message. That is our message to everybody.
You talk now about a lean season.
Yes.
We'll come back to that, but let me get back to you, Edele, and to ask what you think, apart from the economic situation around the world, in Africa, and particularly in Nigeria, what you think is responsible in the Nigerian context. What are the other factors, the pull factors that probably impact this whole challenge of poor nutrition?
Yeah, one that passionately comes to me is gender, inclusion, or gender issues, gender barriers, social norms, that limits women's access to, food, to good decision-making about health care in the homes, access to a health facility to seek care for themselves and for their children. For instance, in some circumstances or in some regions, a woman cannot access health facilities, for instance, for her own health. She does not go out to make money. The bottom line is, give a woman the money, she will first think about her children, to feed them properly, and to feed herself as well. But in our situation, where it's more of male dominance, have you ever seen a male that is malnourished, generally speaking? You see, all we see is the faces of women and children that are malnourished. We see that the males, we hardly see males malnourished because they go out, they eat at the different junctions, different joints, especially in the northern Nigeria, where we have huge burden of malnutrition. And then the women come back, receive whatever they bring, which is very little, and that is what they will feed to themselves and to their children, with little economic empowerment for women. we are really having it very, very difficult. So one key challenge is low literacy level for women, gender, women not being part of so many decision-making processes, with little or no economic power or voice. We just, their voices are just not heard in the society. So once we start to consider all of those social barriers and norms that limit women in achieving their potentials, taking their agencies, once we can put that in place. I remember growing up, I was healthy. My mom was always making sure we have good food. We never used to worry about what kind of food we eat. That's even the least of the problem, because that's what the mother does. And because she have access to homestead gardens, she could go to the back of the garden, bring in the vegetables. We have fruit trees. Children, we climb up the trees, we pluck different fruits. We have all of these things, but now we are not even having that space again for homestead gardening.
Urbanization has taken that away.
So those are some of the things we should start considering. They are now affecting us more because we don't have those necessary things, structures that were in place. Then look at the healthcare systems in those days. In fact, education system, we go to school free. As a female, I went to school free. Now we don't have all that. Your parents have to think first about your school fees, which is very huge, before you think about food. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the, day-to-day practical things that actually affect.
Is it possible that a man or men could look robust and look healthy, and yet they do not have the kind of nutrition that they desire or that is required for them to live well?
Well, yes. I mean, we have, we generally talk about 3 to 4 forms of malnutrition. Mal means bad. So you talk about what is called undernutrition, which means you're not getting enough of the different food groups, etc., that was said by the 2 different speakers. You can have overnutrition. So you are getting too much of maybe one type or another type. You've heard of being overweight, obese, and then you have the chronic diseases, blood pressure, diabetes, etc. But you have a third type, which many people don't talk about, and that is hidden malnutrition or hidden hunger or micronutrient malnutrition. And that means that you don't have enough nutrients in your body based on what are called the cutoff levels. One example is iron and anemia. We all need iron to feel strong. In Nigeria, we have a lot of malaria, for example. Malaria depletes your body of iron resources. So when you are sick and after you recover, I always tell people have more iron. So you could look healthy, and I may test your blood now, and I may discover that you may have anemia. Or you may have another micronutrient deficiency. So we have a lot of vitamins and minerals. So on the outside, you can look healthy, but on the inside, you are not, for sure.
And given the situation we have on hand right now, where people practically live from hand to mouth, is it possible that we just might be missing out on all the necessary nutrients for healthy living?
Absolutely. This is why I started with the numbers when I spoke earlier, that of the 35 million children, 12 to 13 million are stunted, another 3 million are wasted, another 23, 24 million have anemia, which is iron deficiency. So if we look at these 3, very often in the same person or the same child, you may have all 3 things happening. And that is a difficult situation. So, and then our health system has to deal with the consequence of that, right? So I'll just give you one thing one mantra that I always tell people: prevention is better than cure. It takes little to prevent malnutrition. We have some strong, easy-ish fixes to it. For example, breastfeeding was mentioned, or breast milk. It's an absolutely fantastic, I would say, it's a fantastic food. As mammals, we are supposed to breastfeed our children. And in Nigeria, I want to congratulate women. Over 90% of our women breastfeed their young. What we want women to do, or be supported to do, is breastfeed within the first hour. That is like your first vaccine for your child. So give your child your breast milk. No water, no infant formula. Don't listen to anybody. Your milk is the best for your child in the first hour. And for the first 6 months, only breast milk, nothing else. So we're seeing in Nigeria, it's hot. You know, we're just coming out of the summer. It's very hot. Temperatures get to 40, 45 degrees. And of course, if I'm thirsty, I think my child is thirsty, so I just give my child a little water, but that does a lot of harm. And that's the first way in which malnutrition starts to set in, because I'm not giving the child my valuable breast milk and I'm exposing the child to a health risk. But breast milk has enough water. If you breastfeed your child, the child does not need anything else. First 6 months, only breast milk, no water, no infant formula, nothing. So it's a good start to life.
All right, Henrich, let's look at it this way. The UNICEF says that food insecurity in Nigeria is becoming a major problem. In fact, it says that 25 million people are food insecure in Nigeria alone. And of that number, 1 million suffer what they describe as acute food insecurity. Now, what are the medical implications of such a scenario?
Yeah. So in such a scenario whereby a lot of those numbers are suffering from acute food insecurity, which usually means that short-term malnutrition most times it's actually caused by man due to the fact of finance problem, unemployed, and they're not able to provide for themselves to actually be able to get the actual food that they need for their system. Now, it's one thing for you to be able to buy food, it's another thing for you to be able to buy the nutritious food that you actually need. Okay, so that's why we always identify to make sure that you are getting the actual food that will provide you with all the necessary nutrients to protect your body and then prevent you from malnourishment. And just like the other lady said, we have different types of malnutrition. So in most cases, we're looking at, in this case in particular, we're looking at undernutrition. So in most cases, most of the things they expose themselves to is low immunity. Basically, their immune system becomes low because their white blood cell count is reduced. Their defense mechanism is not strong enough to protect the body from any bacterial, virus, or infection that is coming. So they are predisposed to different diseases, basically. And another thing again is that they'll be weak, they will not be productive, and so many things like that. So that's why we actually try as much as possible to make sure that it's one thing for them to know what to eat, it's another thing for them to actually get the exact adequate balanced diet to make sure that they are well fed and they're able to prevent malnutrition, basically.
Now, let me stretch that a little bit further, Erich. The National Bureau of Statistics just released some data for January this year, and it shows that the national average, the cost of a healthy diet is, that's per an adult, not even children now, is about 858 naira. That's a national average. There are some states that the figures, the cost is higher. There are some that are less than that. But none of them, of course, is less than about 650 naira per an adult. But the national average is 858 naira per an adult. Now, given that situation, and of course, we have also painted the picture of an economy that is in trouble, of banditry, insecurity, which is, of course, has a direct link to food insecurity. How do people go about getting balanced diet in order to maintain a healthy lifestyle?
For me, in that situation, I feel that their income needs to be reviewed, because once they have enough, they will be able to get the actual food they need. In Nigeria today, food in the market has increased by about more than 50%. It's actually very expensive, and a lot of people are struggling to afford the quality food they actually need. And that's why sometimes people just settle for less. They settle for what they can afford. So to actually mitigate that, I think there needs to be an increase in income in terms of their productivity, what they earn. And once they're able to earn a little more, they will be able to afford enough. They will be able to afford to actually purchase the purchasing power to get the actual food that they actually need.
Hayadele, how does that sit with you?
Yes, that's one way to go. We need to have more income because a lot of studies have shown that with increase in income, there's increase in food availability and food increase in nutritional, as in adequate nutrition you can, diet you can afford. Other things we could also look at is, sensitization and educating women or caregivers how to use locally available fruits around you. It doesn't have to be very expensive. Luckily for us in Nigeria, we have our soils are fertile. We have fertile soil. We can grow things that are available year in, year out. We have different fruits and vegetables in season almost all the time. So once
All of which are very expensive now.
they're expensive, but if we can do like home gardening, like mango tree, you could plant it around you in your surroundings, in your environment. You can plant potted vegetables, which you can maintain. You can be creative around your any land that's available to you. You can plant any season, any fruit in season, anything that is available in the season. So all you need to know is to know, how to use those locally available products or food to make adequate diet. Like we have said earlier, just make sure you have them in the different combinations and they color up your plate. Other thing you could also do, we could also look at preservation. For example, there are some fruits like tomatoes. When tomato is in season, it just goes to waste most of the time, from where they are being produced. Before you bring them, most of it, almost half of it, is gone. But if we have a system that can continue to help preservation, not even at the high level, it could be local ways of preserving vegetables. You could dry them, you could preserve them for use, later use. Simple things that were done even in olden days. We could, do some of these things to still have food year in and year out. If we don't want to go through the tech system where we have to go through huge expensive to make food, to preserve food. Other things that could also be done is women empowerment, giving power to women to be able to, doesn't have to be a big income, just something little, just give a woman something little. The first thing she would think about is how our children and herself, how they will eat. So once we can bring women out of illiteracy, can educate women, educate the girl child. Adolescence is another stage we should not ignore. Because once they are in good nutrition, then you can be rest assured that for generations we'll continue to have healthy children. Because once they go into the reproductive ages in good nutrition, you can imagine their children also will go in good nutrition. What is actually happening to Nigeria right now that we have very huge amounts of stunting level? It's not even something that just started now. It's something that started some generations back. And it's, once stunting stunting can't be corrected. It's for life. And you can pass it to the next generation. So we should start to think about generational effects of malnutrition, even as we start to tackle these issues.
So now let's look at the push and pull factors for malnutrition in Nigeria, especially because that's your area of coverage for now. And here we're talking about conflicts, banditry, high inflation. We're also talking about the Russia-Ukraine war, which has also created a situation where the flow of particularly grains into some African countries, including Nigeria, have been negatively impacted. Now, what do you think is the immediate, the medium-term, and long-term solutions to this?
Thank you. It's a really interesting question, and there's, we could debate this for many hours, but I'll say what I said this morning at another meeting. One, as I said, we're looking at an urgency. I keep bringing up the lean season this year. We have the next 6 months to go through. So yes, the country is going through economic reform. Any country that goes through reform will have some ups and downs. But we have to make sure that some things remain stable or constant, and that one something is food price. So when we look at food inflation this year, and the latest analysis, like I said, from last week, we're looking at some of the highest food inflation in the last 20 years in Nigeria. The last time this happened was 2005. So one immediate solution that the government can look at is a few actions that can help to regulate the prices of food that is there in the market. And there are a few things that they can do on this. The second issue that you tackled was that of mandatory security. So access, I would put that more as, rather than saying it's mandatory or security, I would just say it's more about access to farming lands and the ability to cultivate. So two things, you need the access, but you also need the technical and little bit of financial support to be able to cultivate and produce. In that situation, what was also said before is promotion of homestead gardens and micro kind of enterprises around poultry, etc., because we need to push self-sufficiency. And I actually must congratulate the government as part of the food systems transformation. This is something that they are trying to do and push, but we need to do it perhaps a little faster, maybe, given the situation. The last thing I would say, and we should not ignore this, is, well, actually maybe two things. One, as was mentioned also, we need to bring down the amount of wastage in the food system that is happening. So post-harvest losses is the technical term. If we are growing 100 tomatoes, we're finding that 30 of those are not reaching the market or households. They're getting lost because they cannot be preserved, sold, etc. There are small things you can do. So you don't have to bring food from outside, etc. If we just address the post-harvest loss in the country, we can make more food available. The last thing I would say, though, and it's quite difficult to change, is the socio-behavioral practices around how we eat. You know, you asked our nutritionist and dietitian sitting in Lagos, what should I be eating for lunch today? And I think that kind of information, because food habits are very cultural. Even me, I know I have my food and I love to have a cup of tea or coffee after my food. That's not good, actually, because if I have coffee after my food, it's inhibiting the absorption of nutrients. But, you know, I tell myself, but I like to have coffee, so I have it. How do we make sure that some of these sociocultural habits are changed in favor of good nutrition? Like I mentioned, breastfeeding, how do we make sure that is pushed? Our children in the age group 6 to 24 months need to eat a diverse diet. They need at least 5 out of 8 food groups every day in their food. We're seeing children are getting some starch, like, you know, gari, pounded yam, etc., and some vegetable maybe because in the soup. Very few of our children are getting protein. Very few are getting fruits. Fruits are wonderful, but for some reason we don't feed it to our children. Why are we not giving it? And this is not just a problem of poor, vulnerable households. We're seeing it across the wealth quintiles. So only 1 out of 3 children in Nigeria in the age group of 2 to 24 months is getting an adequate diet, and we need to change that. So if we do these 2 or 3 things, ensure there's access to food, ensure that we reduce, therefore, the losses that are happening, change the sociocultural practices, Nigeria will emerge as number one in terms of taking care of its children.
And so to address that problem, the United Nations set up what is called the Child Nutrition Fund.
Yes.
Tell us about that nutrition fund and who is benefiting. Is Nigeria one of the countries that is eligible to benefit from that fund? And if it is, how far has it gone?
Thank you. So UNICEF, along with some of our key development partners or donors, such as the British government FCDO, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, have set up this fund. The fund is a global fund, and different countries can be eligible, and yes, Nigeria is eligible. I must congratulate the Federal Ministry of Health already for having drawn down some of the resources over the last few years. And now we're seeing state governments draw down the resources. The beauty of the fund is it's a one-to-one match. So for every naira that the government puts in or that a state puts in, we will match with 1 naira. The fund is meant to enable states to procure and access what we call high-impact nutrition commodities. So such as the ready-to-use therapeutic foods to treat children who may be malnourished, or to buy multiple micronutrient supplements for women who are pregnant. So these commodities can be life-changing and life-saving. I'm happy to share that we have right now about 4 states that have already put money on the table and are drawing this down, and really want to congratulate those for being first-runner states. So we have Jigawa, we have Katsina, we have Adamawa, and I believe it's Gombe is the 4th one. Additionally, we have another, I think, 3 to 4 that have already made the commitments and the funds are to be released. So we have Borno, we have Plateau, we have Kwara State, and I hope I'm not forgetting another state, Jigawa and Katsina. So these are the states that are already coming forward.
I can hear only names of states from the northwest and northeast. What's happening to states in the south-south, in the southeast, in the southwest, in the middle belt, north central of Nigeria? Is it that they do not have issues of malnutrition?
No, they absolutely have issues, and this is something we raised last week when we had all the commissioners from the 36 states in Abuja. The Ministry of Budget and Economic Planning had called the commissioners of Budget and Planning, Agriculture and Health for a meeting, and we shared this. And I have to say, after that, I've seen action. Yesterday, I was speaking to leaders in the southwest of the country about how they can access this fund. So I'm hoping over the next month to see more states from the southwest, from the southern part of the country to access the funds.
So how far do you think this UN-initiated fund can go, particularly in rural communities, in rural areas where most of our people actually live, and where, of course, we also know that the literacy level in these areas is not as high as what it is in the urban centers?
From using a programming lens, most of the time, I even say they are the ones that benefit more from the programs that we have. For instance, there was a particular program for instance, vitamin A supplementation that Nutrition International supports the government of Nigeria. We are in partnership with UNICEF as well on that. If you go to any health facility during the maternal and newborn health, child health weeks, you will find that all the primary health care centers in these communities have access to them. So it gets to them. But if you'll be amazed that if you go to maybe urban areas where you have well-educated people and ask them, did you take your child to receive vitamin A supplementation during the week? Many don't even know about it. And, because perhaps it's not getting to them, you see. That's the reverse. It's expected that the educated should know about these programs and should benefit more. But no, it's the reverse. It's those at the lower grassroots levels that are benefiting more, because sensitizations and demand creation goes more to those levels because of the vulnerability. You know, when you plan a program, you first consider the vulnerability context of it, and then most times programs are pushed there. You can imagine, you mentioned about Northwest, Northeast. You know, we have higher burdens of malnutrition around there. So that's why the government, they are more responsive, they are ready to match funds to ensure that, you know, they lift their people out of this. But in the Southwest, where we have even the education level very high, they don't see it as vulnerable. It's not, you know, people are not seeing the vulnerability of these things. So they are not taking action as fast as you would expect. So, you know, it's just the reverse we are seeing. But they are benefiting because for programming to happen, you first consider those that you feel need it more. And then they are the ones you push those programs to.
All right, let's bring Henrich in now. Henrich, let's look at what you, nutritionists, call severe acute malnutrition. Now, the figures indicate that about 2.5 or 2.6 million children out of the 9 million or so who are facing malnutrition, 2.6 of them are facing severe acute malnutrition. What does severe acute malnutrition mean? And from where you are, where you operate, in Lagos, for instance, what is the situation? How are people dealing with issues of malnutrition in a place like Lagos?
All right, thank you very much. So severe acute malnutrition, like I actually explained the other time, it's actually man-made and it's short-term. And in most cases, it's caused by unemployment sometimes, or a situation whereby an individual or a family finds themselves and for a period of time, they are not able to provide for themselves at that period. So because they're not able to provide for the basic necessities at the period, then the individual or the family and the children will actually go through malnutrition because they're not able to eat enough to make up with their nutritional requirements, their daily nutritional requirements. So for that period, there's going to be some form of deficiency, nutrient deficiency, anemia could pop in because they're not eating properly. So in most cases, that's what causes it. But once that is sorted out, they're able to come back on track. Most importantly, availability, just still being able to afford to eat healthy. That will be able to curb that situation. And here in Lagos, basically, the only challenge I feel or I've seen people in Lagos basically is that they are a little bit ignorant of what it is, what they are supposed to. Some feels that they either know it already, and I don't want to either listen to what you're saying, or some are just completely ignorant about it and believe it's probably not important. That's with my experience with Lagosians, basically. And when there is an issue, that's when they start running up to, when there is a problem already, and that's when they start coming up to start looking for solution. And like what the other lady said, prevention is the best cure. So what we try to do, or what I try to make sure we ensure to do, is to try as much as possible to create enough awareness. Even when people are barely or hardly listening to the information you are trying to give to them, but I tell them, just be aware of this. Someday soon, sometime soon, you will find this information very useful. And that's why I'm craving the indulgence to the entire world to let's look at platforms. Let's look for platforms. Every necessary platforms available to be able to pass this knowledge, to create this awareness as much as possible, you know, in the most simplest language, in the most easiest form, whereby people can understand and see the importance and not wait for the problem before an action is taken. So that's just the major challenge I have here with Lagos and few Lagosians, and they pay more attention to some other things than their nutrition and their health, basically.
All right. Namaz, you want to add something there, and then in doing so, you also need to break down for us what the UN calls child wasting or wasting. What is the correct pronunciation there?
Wasting.
Wasting.
I know we, as nutrition people, we tend to have a lot of jargon.
Yeah.
So thank you for asking us to break it down. But when, like I said, when we say that children are stunted, it means they are short in terms of where they should be for their age. And this is for under 5 children. So I know people say, but look at so-and-so, they're tall and, you know, they're not stunted. But because Nigerians on average are quite tall. So, but if you look at the height for age of under 5 children, and that's universal across the world, then we will see that they are short. Wasting is when we say a child has wasted away. That means they are too thin for the height that they have. And this is a sign of what we call, you know, when you are sick, if you fall sick as an adult, don't you lose weight? So it's the same thing. So if there is a shock to the system of the child, that child will start to lose weight. So it could either come because the child's not getting enough food to eat, the child may have fallen sick, the child is not being looked after properly, the conditions are not hygienic, etc. And of that, so that child we say is wasted. And wasting can have different forms. You can be moderately wasted or severely wasted. And you ask that question that 2.6 million children are severe acute malnutrition or severely wasted. These children are at the highest risk of death, or you know, so they are most likely to die. And we have to therefore treat it like we do when a child is sick, take them to the doctor and treat them for it. And that's why we have different ways of treating them, and that's why the Child Nutrition Fund also. I also want to say when a child is malnourished, and you've seen some of the data, in this hour that we're doing this program, almost 100 children would have died somewhere in Nigeria. It's a very sobering thought. And 50% of those are dying because they are malnourished. That means if I come together with everybody and do something about it, at least I'll prevent 50 of those children from dying. So I hope that simplifies the breakdown that, you know, 50% of our children are dying because they're not getting adequate nutrition.
How can we change the narrative?
We can change the narrative by joining all our forces, you know, from the media, from the international and national organizations, the UN, the government, academic institutions. We need to come together and focus on what I call my request is we need to focus on the first 1,000 days of life, from pregnancy to when a child is 2 years of age. If we can secure the nutrition of the mother, the nutrition and health of the mother, and then the baby once the baby is born, we will have changed the narrative. So second mantra of this interview is prevent by focusing on the first 1,000 days of life.
Okay. Delia?
Yeah, and in addition to that, I'll also say we carry the men along, because women cannot function if you know, with regards to the social norms around us, we need to find a way where we can help remove the barriers that limit the women's nutrition and the child nutrition.
Social, cultural, and religious.
Yes.
Okay.
So we need to carry along the men as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time on the program. I've been really, really educated on this, and I believe that our viewers out there at least will pick one or two things about this situation. It's from the figures that UNICEF and even Doctors Without Borders have provided is very frightening, and one that every government, whether at federal, state, or local government level, must pay a lot of attention to. The children, they say, are our future. We must keep them alive and keep them healthy. Thank you so much for your time. Nemat Hajiboy is a Chief of Nutrition, UNICEF Nigeria. Thank you so much for your time. And Ayodele Gbemileke, Senior Program Officer, Maternal, Newborn Health, and Nutrition. Thank you so much for your time. And of course, we were joined from Lagos by Herish Babatunde Shoteye, who is a clinical nutritionist and a dietitian. Thank you for finding time to join us and to educate us. I wish you a very good time out there. Thank you so much, everyone. And for our viewers, we want to thank you for investing your time with us. We'll see you again when we bring you a fresh edition of the program, People politics, and power. Bye for now.